Welcome to the Peterson's Bowhunting Podcast. All bow hunting, all the time. Now, here are your hosts, Editor Christian Berg and Associate Editor Mark Dempko.
So hey everybody, welcome to the Bowhunting Podcast presented by Lancaster Archery Supply. Christian, welcome. PJ Riley, Lancaster Archery, welcome. Beautiful spring day here, and we have a pretty interesting episode, and it ties into how all three of us sort of got started bow hunting. None of the three of us ever started bow hunting until we were adults. Most people, they start learning how to archery hunt and hunt from a father or an uncle and a mother and whatever. And we didn't start till we were all over the age of 18. And recently I sat down with Elizabeth Kligge of the National Deer Association, and she is the Field to Fork Coordinator for the NDA. Basically, that's a program that started back in Georgia a few years ago, and it is really focused on mentored programs to introduce adults to hunting. And she is the only actually full-time coordinator for the program, and she's based here in Pennsylvania, so she's the only state coordinator they have. But they've done dozens of programs in 17 different states. But here in Pennsylvania, they do programs in southwestern part of the state, in the Erie area, and then they work with the Game Commission and the John Hines National Wildlife Refuge down by Philadelphia and some other locations, and they do crossbow hunts. And it's basically a wonderful turnkey program where they take people who may never have a chance to bow hunt, coming from urban areas or families where nobody hunts, and they give them all the tools, the keys that they can get started. And so they've been doing this program at John Hines since about 2019. I think last year they had about 50 people that took part in that hunt down there at John Hines, as well as Benjamin Rush State Park. But it's really fascinating because they give them an incredible overview or orientation. They get them out on the range to use crossbows, and then they have them actually hunt. So the key takeaway I found so fascinating is a lot of these people never even thought about hunting or saw hunting, quite honestly, in a negative light, because they just only knew what they saw in the media and heard in social media and things like that. And a lot of them not only now want to continue hunting, they actually want to pay it forward and become mentors themselves. So it's an incredible program. Hopefully everybody can enjoy it, but it really talks about coming from non-traditional hunting backgrounds and getting started in the sport. And we all have similar stories, believe it or not. Well, we're all longtime hunters. We all started in different ways.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting, Mark. And I don't know if you talked about this in your interview, which is to follow, but if you did, I don't want you to repeat it now, but you were telling me that 70-year-old lady, was that part of that interview?
It was. All
right. So Mark's got some great stories in that interview, and we've got some interesting stories too. And really the premise, PJ, why did I want to get you guys involved in this episode? Because I'm like, well, first of all, obviously Lancaster Archery has the gear, and you've got the knowledge and you've got the passion, right? That's your tagline. And we want to remind folks that, of course, if you need anything, you want to go to lancasterarchery.com for all your bow hunting needs. But beyond that, you have some pretty interesting stories about your own start in this sport. And, it's not easy to become a bow hunter without a mentor, is it, BJ?
Nope, it is not. Yeah, we were just saying, I was out of college. I always knew I wanted to do it. I had actually uncles who did, but they weren't uncles who lived near me. And so my brother-in-law, he wasn't my brother-in-law yet, was kind of into it, but largely I was on my own. And actually it starts with, I got my first compound bow. I knew I didn't want to go right out hunting. I'll never forget, I went to my first 3D shoot with a dozen arrows, and I lost absolutely every single one of them on that 3D shoot. I didn't even get all the way through the course. I had no arrows, and they were like cheap aluminum, so they all bent, and when I missed, they didn't survive. So that was my start. But then going hunting, I just walked out to this state park, French Creek State Park. I didn't know what I was doing, went out into the woods. I'm walking around with my bow. I remember getting this cool camo net for my face that I thought I needed. This stretchy spandex
Great.
thing.
Yeah, man.
It
Awesome.
was,
They'll never see you coming.
and I'm standing behind a tree and I'm like, what am I doing? This can't work. There's no way this is going to work. So of course it didn't. And it was just, that was difficult. Eventually my now brother-in-law, eventually started tagging along with him. And actually I joined a club, Frontier Archery Club, and talked to some folks there and just kind of picked my way along. But yeah, no, I didn't have the, typical, hey, all right, here we go. We're going to go. This is what you do. I just didn't have that. And yeah, like you said, that's a tall ask to just figure it out yourself. And of course, there was no YouTube. I couldn't even look it up on YouTube back then. This is 1989, I believe.
And so this was your first hunting period, though? Like you didn't go rifle hunting before this, or had you?
I don't think I had. I think I went, our bow hunting in PA starts before gun. I think I went bow hunting that fall with nobody. And then I went gun hunting. I know the first time I went gun hunting was at my brother-in-law's camp in Lycoming County. And I think this bow hunting was, the month before that gun hunt.
So how many years did it take you, PJ, before you tagged your first archery deer?
Archery deer. I believe it was, I didn't shoot anything. I shot my first one with a gun. I'm going to say it was 3 years before I shot one with my bow. It was a button buck. I'll never forget. It was super dark, and I had one of those lighted pins back in the old days. And if you think about what it was now, it's the absolute worst lighted pin you could have. The pin actually was battery powered, so it shined a light back at you. So I'm aiming.
You're completely blinded. You're
completely blinded by it. It's dark, and I turn this light on, this pin on, and all I see is this bright red light. Somehow, by a miracle, I killed the deer. But yeah, I remember turning that pin on and thinking, "Oh man, I can't see anything."
Well, so it's amazing, right? Because 3 years, and obviously you had personal interest, you had some family that was sort of involved, but for the average person, if you think about it, you hand somebody a bow or a crossbow or whatever and be like, hey, good luck, stick with it for 3 years and maybe you'll finally kill something. How many people are going to stick with it that long, Mark? So tell us about your story. You said you were 19 and you got into it with your uncle, Mark, and same thing with you. You hadn't gun hunted, no hunting at all, and you started right away with the archery.
Yeah, my dad had hunted as a young person, but then he quit. And so all of a sudden, when I became 18 or 19, I decided that I wanted to learn to hunt. Well, I had an uncle who hunted, but I did gun hunt for a year or two. But as far as archery hunting, I was given a bare bow, sort of turned loose, very much like you, PJ, given a bare bow with the old style pins, and went and plopped down in the woods and didn't necessarily knew what I was doing. And the reason I tell you that is because I'll never forget how I got my first deer. My uncle and two other people, we got together and made a deer drive. You don't typically do that when you're bow and arrow hunting, but we had a spot where there was a river and a canal. So it was a narrow strip of land and it narrowed down. And we did this, and I had success. And back then in Pennsylvania, you could only get one deer a year, I believe, at the time. It was either a buck or a doe. And made a drive, and I had a doe come by, and literally it was a 15-yard shot. I actually didn't even have a tree stand. I climbed up a tree that grew at an arc or an angle and stood up there. So I was maybe 15 feet off the ground. Wasn't that high. But this doe came by, I took it. And the next deer through was a 6-pointer. I'll never forget that. The deer ran, and it ran out into the river. And I thought, wow, this is turning out interesting. Ended up on a really small island, maybe a quarter of an acre, and it was laying there dead. But it was an interesting way to get started. And I kept that bare bow.
So wait. So did you get wet? Do you have to get wet?
Yeah, we had to go out in the river and retrieve the deer. And but But the thing was, it was so exciting to me as being 18 or 19 years old, whatever it was, I was hooked. And I kept that bare bow until literally I pulled it back one day and it bent in half and it just, all the fiberglass and everything just cracked. And then I went and got a Martin.
Well, you got your money's worth out of that bare bow, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. And everything was so basic back then in the late 80s or the early 90s, whenever that would have been, that it was just, the quiver was part metal and the pins were just basically pins, and you would tighten them up using nail polish or whatever you could do. And everybody has similar stories. But Christian, how did you get started? I mean, what was your progression?
I just want to follow up with you for a second. So that was your first year, right? The first,
yes.
And was it the first time ever, or did you go out a few times?
I had tried to go out archery hunting a few times before that and not had much luck. That was my first deer ever with the bow. It was that doe, but I was absolutely hooked then because the challenge was so great, plus the excitement of that experience.
Well, that's awesome, man. And I think that there's some similarities between our stories in this. You had that initial success, and that was a pretty thrilling encounter. It's a moment, obviously, that you'll never forget. The deer swimming over to the island and making you go swim over there to get it or whatever. I mean, that adds some really interesting, but it was that hook of success with which PJ didn't have. And so I have to give him credit because he stuck with it for several seasons. Now, for me, it was a little bit of both. I actually started, interestingly enough, I had grown up in Rhode Island. I grew up in a very suburban area. Hunting's not a big deal in southern New England, but had gone to college down here in Pennsylvania. And so I was just out of college about a year and a half. I had some buddies. I was living in Bucks County at the time. I had some buddies who were big into hunting. They were always talking about the excitement of deer hunting. And I decided I was going to give that a try. Not initially with archery, but with during what would be in the shotgun season there in the special regs counties, PJ. No center fire rifles allowed there. So I had to shoot with 12 gauge slugs. I didn't even want to buy a gun just to try it out. I actually borrowed an old Winchester Model 12 pump gun from a guy who was then my landlord. I was renting a little cottage in the Sellersville, Percy area. And then I was working as a reporter at the Intelligencer out of Doylestown at that time. I didn't have anywhere to hunt, but one of the township supervisors in Bedminster Township lived on a farm. And so I called him. His name was Eric. I called him up and I said, Eric, I'm thinking about trying deer hunting this year. I've never done it. Would it be okay if I hunted on your farm? Because I've seen some deer out in the fields at your place. He said, yeah, that's all right. You could do that. So, I marched out there all by myself on opening day with an orange coat that my father-in-law loaned to me. And I sat down with my 12 gauge and the sun came up, and his farm actually backs right up to Nockamixon State Park. And it was funny because, again, you talk about not having any idea what you're doing. I was hunting completely backwards because, typically bed to feed to bed pattern, right? Deer are going to come to the farm in the evening and back into the forest and then bed for the day. So all those deer were over there in the park, basically. And I was sitting on the edge of a cut cornfield on the farm. And as the sun came up, I started to realize, like, oh, there's a guy in orange, and there's a guy, and there's a guy. And it was like the Orange Army over there on the public land. And you start to hear some shots and stuff. And of course, I'm not seeing any deer around me. And, I don't know how long goes by, not long, maybe an hour and a half. I'm like, this is so stupid. Like, I don't understand why my buddies think this is so exciting. And I was like, any poor deer that's over there in the park that wants to come out here is going to have to run the gauntlet of all those other hunters. I'll never see anything. So I stood up and I'm like, you know what? I'm getting out of here. And I'm like, well, I'll just take a walk around the perimeter of the farm. So I walked down along the border there with the state park and walked sort of the whole north end of the property. And then I came around on the west side, and I was coming around there on the south end, this last little strip of trees in between two farm fields there. And I get just about to the end of it, maybe 20 or 30 yards left. And I look over and there's a buck standing there. And this buck, you know how sometimes when you see deer, like you stare at each other and you're not sure which one of you guys is more surprised, right? And I'm thinking, I can't believe that deer is there. And that deer is looking at me and being like, I can't believe that hunter is there. And I raise the shotgun up to my shoulder and I line it up and I try to squeeze the trigger and nothing happens. And I'm like, what in the world? And I'm like, dude, you got to take the safety off. So I like literally like take the gun down off my shoulder and like flip off the safety. And the whole time this buck is just standing there looking at me. I bring it back up to my shoulder again and I squeeze the trigger. The gun goes off and the deer just hits the ground, dead as a doornail. And I start to just shake, like the adrenaline hits me, right? And I'm like, oh, and I'm like, wow, this is pretty cool, this deer hunting, you know? And so I walk over to the deer. I look down at this thing and I'm like,
now what?
He ain't bleeding. No, I couldn't figure out where I hit him. I'm looking and there's no holes in him. There's no blood. There's no nothing. And here I like look at his head. I shot the thing through the skull. I was aiming for the chest and I missed by about 2.5 feet and put a 12 gauge slug right through its skull. I mean, we want to talk about luck, right? That's how nervous I was. But to your point, Mark, I was hooked, right? I was hooked. Here was a guy who, I think it was 1997, opening day of the Pennsylvania firearms season, 1997, a guy who had never hunted before in his entire life, who went and took the hunter safety course with a bunch of 12-year-olds and their dads, and had a borrowed gun and a permission place to hunt, went out and by no rights of skill, privilege, deservedness, any category that you could possibly come up with, I did not have any right to shoot a deer that morning. And yet I did. And it literally changed the course of my life to the point that I'm now sitting here with you guys. So it's kind of a cool story. And I, you know, and so tough with no mentor. Now, on the archery side, I was fortunate, PJ, and this is where we can transition in towards Mark's interview and what you guys do at Lancaster, because after like 2 seasons of doing the shotgun thing there in Bucks County, I was ready for more. And I decided I wanted to try bow hunting. And that's where I probably made one of the best decisions of my life in walking into archery at the Glen in Allentown, Pennsylvania, which is a good pro shop, quality family that runs that and really has good archery knowledge, and had, you know, the good fortune of getting set up. I bought a used PSE Mach, I think it was a Mach 8 or a Mach 9. And there was a guy, I'm a lefty. There was a guy, Terry Ernie, who used to be one of the bow techs there, who was a lefty. And he had one of his old bows on the used rack. And I bought that, but I got fitted properly. The guys in the shop taught me a little bit about how to shoot a bow and actually hit where you're aiming and make sure your draw length is right and your sight is set up the right way and your rest is calibrated properly. So, I mean, yeah, without that, how would I have ever figured it out?
Yeah, it's that's a whole different learning curve there with the archery stuff. I remember with my first bow, so I didn't know about sight picture. And so I hadn't found Lancaster archery yet. I did find them quickly, but I hadn't found them when I began. I don't even remember where I got my first bow at. Probably Kmart. We didn't have Walmart. Probably at Kmart I got my first bow. And so I had the peep sight set up, and it was set so high that at 20 yards, I couldn't actually I couldn't get a pin high enough that I could aim at the target. And I'll never forget when I started shooting at this club, I would take 2 regular targets, put them one on top of the other, and I would aim at the center. I set my sight. So I aimed at the bottom target to hit the center of the top one.
Oh, that was a good system.
It worked. I mean, I could hit it, but obviously that was not ideal. And then finally somebody saw me putting up the 2 targets, was like, "What are you doing?" And then they're like, "Dude, your peep sight is way too high." But if you don't have that, how do you know? Kmart, they didn't have a pro shop of any stripe back then. You went in and bought a bow. That was it.
Yeah. Well, and so, thankfully there are, pro shops around the country. And certainly you guys at Lancaster, you've got the Lancaster Archery Academy there. You can do literally, from very basic introductory. Matter of fact, you guys still do the Groupon in like introduction to archery. Yeah. So you can do the old Groupon, archery experience for somebody who's literally never shot a bow before, all the way up to, again, literally like Olympic level stuff, because, you are coaching Olympians in there. So it runs the full gamut.
We occasionally have done special bow hunting classes too that are geared toward people who have never bow hunted before, the real basics of bow hunting. We've done those periodically because then again, like you with your first deer there, okay, you get one. Now what? I mean, obviously now you can YouTube how to field dress a deer, but if you don't have service or whatever, and even if you do have that, that's pretty daunting to come up there. I just killed this 200-pound deer. Now you want me to gut this thing, cut it open?
I actually have a pretty funny little anecdote on that. So I was standing over that deer, and it was like a little fork horn. And I think I couldn't find the one antler. I think I blew it off its head with the slug. So it had one antler that was about 4 inches long. And, but anyway, I'm standing there and that's like, well, now what? Well, my father-in-law, who was thrilled because I wasn't a hunter, right? When I married his daughter, he's a PA rifle hunter, sort of a traditional. So he was he's like, man, my son-in-law is going to get into hunting. So he loaned me like that old orange coat that he had. And he bought me a Buck 110 knife, the classic Buck 110. And he gave me a deer drag. And the deer drag was still brand new in the package. It was in my backpack. And so it was one of those where it's the piece of cardboard and then the clear plastic that's glued onto that. And then the strap for dragging the deer was in there. So on the back of that cardboard of the deer dragger was a step-by-step instruction on how to field dress a deer, like 5 steps.
Yeah.
And I literally knelt down and laid that piece of cardboard on the ground, and I used that Buck 110 knife that had never been used before, and I gutted my first deer using the little diagram on the back of the deer drag package.
That was our YouTube back then. That's what you had. I know I had some little book with me, but yeah, that's what you had to do.
I figured it out, I guess. I mean, I got stuff out of there and I got it back to my truck and brought it home.
I remember the first one that I did, I didn't realize that there was stuff in front of the chest cavity, that the membrane was there. I took everything up to the membrane, so obviously all I was getting was the guts. And I got to the butcher shop and the butcher was like, "Hey, you didn't take any of the lungs or the heart out." And I said, "What are you talking about?" He showed me. He's like, "Up here." It never even occurred to me when I gutted the deer, to look for the parts. Yeah, where are the lungs? Where is the heart? I don't know.
Well, so though, and again, this is where we got to steer it back to Mark, right? I always did my own deer butchering, but about I don't know, 10 years ago, 8 years ago, a Mennonite built a butcher shop right down the road from me, literally a mile down the road. And Philip Burkholder is like a gift from God. He does such a great job at such a reasonable price. I can't justify the aggravation anymore.
Yeah.
But Philip has people every year when you talk about not knowing what you're doing and not having a mentor. Some people bring the deer in without gutting them at all.
I believe it.
And of course, he'll charge an extra $15 or whatever to do that. But like, that's what having a mentor is all about, right, Mark? I mean, how is somebody going to know what to do?
It is so vital, whether you're starting out obviously as a child or if you're stepping in the woods for the first time as an adult. And that's one of the things that makes this Field to Park program and some of these other programs that wildlife agencies are doing so crucial. They're trying to reach new audiences, more diverse audiences, and they give you this program where you learn everything you need to do at least to get you through those first couple experiences. And we'll talk about that in the next segment, but it covers the field dressing, and it even covers options for butchering and how you handle all of that. And they even serve up some dishes where people get to sample venison and things like that, because for a lot of the people that are going through a program as a first-time hunter, it's all new to them. It's brand new. And it's so important because bow hunting has such a steep learning curve, especially at the beginning, that you need somebody to help you out if that's the route you're going to go, whether you're going to be hunting with a compound or a crossbow.
Yeah. And I think, that's something that, of course, pretty much everybody who listens to this podcast is probably a bow hunter, and not just a brand new one, or not somebody who's necessarily looking to come and get into the sport, but is a fairly experienced or somewhat experienced bow hunter. And mentoring is one of the greatest needs that we have in our community. I mean, yeah, a program like Field to Fork, doing things with people, in Philadelphia, literally, deer hunting with jet airplanes, coming in and out of Philadelphia International is really neat. But there's a need for people all over, from the cities and suburbs to the rural areas where, hey, PJ, you ever hear of a smartphone? Like these things are taking over the world. And like, there's a desperate need for people to get connected with the outdoor world. And we can all give back to our sport if we're willing to share our knowledge with others.
Absolutely. And I'm glad I'm not just getting started now, because I would say I am pretty much of an introvert. And so I know I would do everything on YouTube, but since we didn't have that, I had to ask for help, because I knew, okay, I get this deer down, I have absolutely no clue what to do. I had cleaned fish before, but that's about it. And I'm thinking, I don't know what to do. Even as far as what do you do with it? I don't know, or I didn't know then. And so it was, yeah, it's as you mentioned, especially with bow hunting, that is a steep learning curve. Just getting I think people see other archers shooting, and I know when we have new people come in, I think they have an expectation that they're going to be able to shoot better than they will when they start. And so just, having folks have that opportunity to learn, hey, yeah, it's okay to be spraying them all over the place when you start. You probably don't want to go out hunting while you're like that. Work on those skills, get that. I know for me, I shot leagues and stuff, and I did a bunch of shooting just to be able to get that down before I got out there. Because archery, I will say, that's when I started bow hunting. I had a bow my whole life. I always had recurve bows and stuff my whole life. So I had been shooting archery for a long time.
Well, you want to talk about, being proficient and all that. I mean, I think everybody kind of goes through that journey as a bow hunter. Like, there's thinking you're good in the backyard, and then there's thinking you're good in the field, right? And I can remember, many misses, and some bad hits, early
Yeah.
bow hunting career. And you kind of come to that place where it's like, man, I either got to get better at this or I got to stop doing it, because it's like, it's scary out there, man. Like, you got to get yourself
Yeah.
together.
Well, it's funny how the little, flashes of intelligence come in. But I remember my first time, before I had killed a deer with a bow, I was passing up these, 4 corns and 6 points and stuff. That's like, I want one of the big ones. And then I remember the thought occurring to me, I've never actually shot one before with a bow. Maybe I ought to try that first. Take the gimme, take the layup, and then get picky after that.
Absolutely. And Mark, why don't we sort of kick it over to your segment with this final thought, which I'll let you comment on. But it seems to me that, obviously the mentorship is so important just to get people involved at all. But the other interesting thing, obviously, because of the name of the program, it ends with fork, which we're obviously talking about food. And that's a great way to reach out to a totally different demographic than maybe a traditional, what we would, or the world would refer to as a trophy hunter, right? This is not about trophy hunting. This is about putting food in the freezer and on the table. And there is a whole host of people out there in the world, and many of them just happen to be in those urban suburban areas, may live in a place that's not as traditional from a hunting standpoint, and may also have political views that aren't as traditional from a hunting standpoint. And it's an awesome opportunity to actually build bridges and connections and to expand our demographic and our understanding and communication between, hunters and non-hunters, and sort of like just educate both sides at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. It's an incredible bonding experience and learning experience for everybody involved. And a couple of things came to my mind as you were saying that is, that field to fork component is so huge. Not only do they get to try the venison, one of the big thrusts of the program is this is special gear for people who want to learn to hunt for their own food. They don't necessarily care about whether they get antlers, or they want to have that experience, and they maybe didn't have the means to get to where they wanted to go. And that's a great program. But I think the other thing that's so important about mentorships and mentoring programs is we all need to do our part for the future of hunting, for the future of sport, to share the things that we love and are so passionate about, to keep the next generation involved. And really, that's what all of this is involved. And hopefully some of the people that take part in something like Field to Fork will continue hunting, maybe pass it on to some of their family members or friends. But for all of us who are diehard bow hunters, we need to do our part as well, because it's so important for the sport of hunting 10, 20, 30, 40 years down the road.
Absolutely. And so when you do that and you've got people that need stuff, don't forget about Lancaster Archery, because you guys are also supporting, maybe not the Field to Fork program, but lots of programs to encourage people to try archery and develop an archery, and just providing, a great resource for those folks who do have questions. To your point, we didn't have the internet back in the day, and you said you really didn't know about Lancaster Archery, but had you would have been able to call and be like, hey, how come I have to set up 2 targets on top of each other and I have to aim at the bottom one to hit the top one?
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm going to say it was only about a year before I found, because actually Rob had a second store that was closer to me. I lived in Westchester, Pennsylvania, and he had a second store at that time that was closer to me. And so, yeah, I found it pretty quickly. And, once I went in there, that was almost 40 years ago. And I can tell you, it is no different. I went in there, the folks were helpful, helped me find the right stuff. What did I need? What did I have that I didn't need? That kind of stuff. Same treatment. If you come in there today, the shop is much bigger, but the treatment's going to be the same. Those guys and ladies over at our pro shop, they're just as excited to see you getting into it as, they remember what it was like for them. So yeah, the treatment's not different. It's 40 years, but the treatment's the same.
Well, that's awesome. PJ, I appreciate you taking some time to be with us today. Hope everybody enjoys, Mark, your interview with this field to fork coordinator. And I know I am looking forward to hearing it because as I sort of teased at the beginning, I want to hear about this 70-year-old or 70-some-year-old woman who killed her first deer last fall with a crossbow. I mean, what a great story that's got to be.
Absolutely incredible from beginning to end.
All right, well, here we go. Thanks, guys.
So, hey, everybody, welcome to the Bowhunting Podcast presented by Lancaster Archery. It's early spring now, and I live here in Pennsylvania. Exciting things are starting to green up, and I have a fellow Pennsylvania resident who is joining us on the podcast today. Elizabeth Kligge, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. Now, I was pretty excited when I heard about you. You are part of the National Deer Association, and you are their field to fork hunter coordinator for the NDA. And you'll probably correct me as I go along. I think that's probably a partnership between the Pennsylvania Game Commission. But field to fork is a really unique program, and it's focused on bringing new adult hunters into the fold. These are people who have never hunted growing up, and they're interested in hunting for food. But let's start there. Why don't you tell me a little bit about the genesis of this program, Field to Fork, and why it's so important right now?
So the program started in 2016 in Georgia, and it started, they started handing out venison samples at a farmer's market and asking people if they'd like to learn to hunt. And it just grew from there. I think we have had field to forks in 17 states now, roughly 150 events or so. And so I'm in charge of the Pennsylvania events only. So I'm the Pennsylvania Field to Fork Coordinator.
Yeah. Now, we always talk in the podcast about how people got started in hunting or bow hunting, but you have probably one of the more unique stories of anybody I've heard of. Not only did you not only start hunting until you were an adult, you were also a vegetarian, if I'm correct.
I was. So I grew up in a normal meat eating household.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, I loved eating meat so much that my dad used to call me the meat eater. So before Steven Rinella was the meat eater, I guess it was me. And then around in high school, I got this idea in my head that if I love animals, I shouldn't eat them. And you have to admit, it does kind of make sense. And that's what I did for several years. And eventually I ended up at a survival school taking classes. I started out as a student, then I was a volunteer, then I was an intern, then I was a caretaker of the property. I actually lived in a primitive shelter for 13 months, no electricity or anything. And I started teaching there. And one of my lectures that I covered was brain tanning deer hides. And an extension of that lecture was doing field dressing demos, and I was picking up a lot of roadkill deer. And one of my friends said, this deer wasn't really harmed intentionally. It was an accident. What is the harm in trying some? So he cooked some up. I tried it. And that was the end of me being vegetarian. So I wasn't in a religious way. I wasn't going to be dogmatic about it. It was just, it worked for me for a time. And then it was time for something else.
Now, did you always hunt, or is that something that came after you started to eat venison?
So after my roadkill phase, I started, being at survival school, you're learning about hunting skills. You're learning about making bows and arrows. You're learning about tracking, and, I was doing the field dressing. So I had all the peripheral skills, camouflage. I had all that down, but I hadn't put it together into an actual hunt. And I also didn't have gear. So although I had learned to make bows and arrows, I had, given them away or added them to the woodpile and whatnot, but I didn't have any, modern bows, firearms. I didn't have any of that gear. So I had this feeling, kind of hanging out in the background of my head. I want to learn to hunt. I want to do this thing, but I didn't know where to go. I didn't have anyone to go with. And eventually, a friend that I met through a meetup group, he invited a small group of us up to his hunting cabin. And he did what actually is sort of like a miniature field to fork. He put different weapons in our hands. He said, try this compound bow, shoot the target, try this crossbow, try this shotgun. And I had never handled any of these things. And coming from a primitive skills background, we were almost discouraged from touching these things. Like they weren't pure enough, but I had a blast. I had so much fun. And I felt like I was seeing the woods for the first time after that weekend. It was like, this is a different place now. And he did take us out for some small game hunting. And, we tried eventually turkey and deer and all these things. But yeah, that was such a game-changing weekend.
I have to ask you, hopefully I don't put you on the spot here. Have you ever had a moment where you said to yourself, through this whole process, what am I doing here? I mean, you've gone through an evolution from eating meat to not eating meat, to learning primitive survival skills where you can basically live off the land, to then picking up and becoming a full-fledged hunter. In this whole transformation, have you ever said to yourself, what am I doing here?
No, actually, at each phase of this, as different as these phases were from each other, I've always felt like I was in the right place. And especially now, joining the NDA, I really feel like I'm in the right place.
Yeah. And to hear about this program, it's so exciting. I first heard about this, I believe it was last fall or last winter. You did a program at the John Hines Wildlife Refuge, which is down by Philadelphia. Now, I'm sure you do more and we'll talk about those, but I was fascinated because that's in a pretty urban environment. It's right next to I-95. And you took a bunch of people who had never hunted before and introduced them to the sport. So tell me about that. How did you even start to pull something like that off?
Well, there are a lot of partnerships involved. So the NDA is working with the Pennsylvania Game Commission, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, which owns the National Wildlife Refuge, John Hines. We even extended the John Hines hunt into Benjamin Rush State Park, which is in the other side of Philly. Mm-hmm. And we ended up putting roughly 50 hunters through the program this fall and winter. And we gave them an orientation, which included, lectures on deer biology, anatomy, shot placement, when to take the shot, when not to take the shot, learning to read blood on arrows, blood trailing, how to set up a blind, the legal side of things, regulations. And then we got them all out on the archery range. We had crossbows for them. So when someone comes in the door for a field of fork, the whole process from the beginning to the end is just given to them. They do not have to provide anything. They don't have to pay for it. They just show up with whatever they're wearing. Of course, for the hunts, we want to make sure they have, appropriate clothing, but they don't need, expensive commercial camo. They can just wear dark colors, some waterproof boots, and they're good to go.
And that's such an important point. I mean, we're all talking about sport here that we love, hunting and bow hunting, but there is sort of a barrier to entry, and that's an expensive sport once you get rolling in it. What I love that you just touched on is every single thing that they need to take part in this experience is provided to them, whether it's through the partners or through some sponsors or whatever. And I think that's so important to get them started. And you talked about, you start with crossbows. Crossbows are today's weapons are incredibly efficient, easy to learn to use. Crossbows are safer than ever. So that you're able to probably do that in a matter of is this something you do over a couple of days? You're able to get them up to speed in just a couple of days?
For the John Hines program, the way we've set it up is that they have a 1-day orientation, and it takes pretty much all day, the daylight hours. They go through stations, we break them up into 4 or 5 groups, and we have them rotate through the stations. And then they show up at their scheduled hunt, which could be a couple weeks later or a couple months later, depending on, how they came into the lottery. But yeah, from beginning to end, it's all pretty seamless.
Now, do you know, did anybody have any success in that hunt? Were there a couple people who were fortunate to take a deer?
Oh, yes. So of our 50 or so hunters, between John Hines and Benjamin Rush, they took 20 deer.
That's incredible for a first year program and working through everything. And so I'm assuming this is something you're going to do again this coming year.
Definitely. We just finalized the schedule for the fall. We're signing up mentors. If anyone's interested in joining, they can send an email to me. That would be elizabeth@deerassociation.com. And I can tell you the dates if you'd like later.
No, please go ahead. I want to share as much as we can about this program because it's fascinating.
All right. So let's see. We have October 19th to 21st at John Hines. We have October 27th and 28th at Benjamin Rush. We have November 17th through 19th at John Hines. We have January 4th through 6th at John Hines and January 18th through 20th at John Hines. And there's the possibility that if we have enough mentors, we'll add an additional hunt at Benjamin Rush because that park in particular is very densely populated with deer.
Yeah, and I want to say you're talking about a key component for this program. You couldn't do it without the mentors. Pennsylvania has a rich hunting heritage and tradition, and I know one of the people that takes part in this program. I think Bob Schwalm was part of that last year, and he's now a game commissioner, and so he's really big in the 3 R's: recruiting, retaining, and reactivating, because that's the future of everything. And but you need the mentors to help you put this on. It's all volunteer run, except for a couple of positions, and you need somebody who has that passion and is willing to transform that and share that with others so they can enjoy the experience as well. And so they're so crucial to the program. But Bob was telling me how much he loved the experience and the great time that the person he mentored had, but you wouldn't be able to do it without those mentors. So if you're listening to this and you're in Eastern Pennsylvania, please check this program out. Go to the National Deer Association's website and check it out because it is a phenomenal program.
Thank you. Yeah, one of our staff sent out an email yesterday with a quote in it, and I'm paraphrasing here, but it said something along the lines of, volunteers are not people who have the time, they're people who have the heart, and is absolutely true.
Yeah, I mean, it's so important. And like I said just a few minutes ago, you can't do it without them. But obviously, you're looking to expand and grow this program. But I'm assuming, and we are bow hunting focused here, but I'm assuming that you do other programs, or you're going to be doing other field fork programs across Pennsylvania?
Yes. All of the Pennsylvania hunts that I've been involved in have been crossbow centered. We have done ones in other states where they use firearms, but so far, especially in Philadelphia, it has to be archery. But it works well, at no matter which location we are. So we had a hunt out at, I'm not really sure if you're familiar with the hunting show, the Bearded Buck. They're out in Mahaffey, PA. They host a wonderful event out there annually. We just scheduled them too. And they are such great hosts. We love going out there. And then we had another one on another private property up toward Erie. That one I was not able to attend, but yes, we do. These partnerships with the state and federal agencies, but we also partner with private landowners who are willing to open up their property and host these events, and they are quite special.
Now, I have to ask you, we were talking about these different programs that you do, and obviously you're in all the different parts of Pennsylvania, because we're talking about the Northwest, the Southeast, the Western parts. It is called Field to Fork. Do you envision at some point you'll incorporating some kind of cooking element into it, or a culinary element in it? Because you're giving them everything that they need to start hunting, to harvest a deer, to field dress a deer. Will you do something in the end where maybe they get a chance to prepare it, or they get a cooking lesson or something?
Yeah. So actually at each meal, we are serving venison. So they're getting a taste of it. They're getting recipes. And then we have had demos where we are butchering and grilling at the same time, and people are sampling the meat. And then we just had this past weekend our potluck, where everyone who attended the hunts through the fall and winter, they show up, they bring a dish. If they got a deer, they're welcome to share it, to create a recipe out of it and bring it. or they can bring a side dish or whatever. But we had several venison dishes there, and maybe even we might have even had some elk there too. Any wild game is welcome at these things.
Now, as you're doing these programs in Pennsylvania, and maybe when you've talked to others across the country, when you're offering these field to fork programs, and these are hunters who have never hunted before. Have you heard success stories of people expressing interest if it's something they'd like to continue to keep doing going forward?
Oh, absolutely. And there are mentees who want to become mentors, which gets me very excited. I'm talking with these guys a lot. And, some of them have gotten deer and some of them haven't, but they're so enthused about it. And they're ready to pass it on. We're going to try to get them in on some early hunting opportunities to give them, a little bit more hands-on experience before they start mentoring, but they could be mentors for the events happening later in the season. And I think that's great.
Yeah, and absolutely. That's what this is all about. We're trying to recruit the next generations of hunters. We often think about kids, but they're just situations, especially in urban areas like where John Hines is, where people may never have been exposed to hunting. And this is a great opportunity where they're looking for a healthy food source, or they just want to learn about something they'd heard about but never taken part in. So kudos to all of you that are pulling this off. I think it's going to be an important part of the future as we're going forward with hunting and bow hunting. I mean, obviously, when you're hunting with a crossbow, it gives you an opportunity to get into areas that might be deer rich, where the deer populations are probably higher than it should be. Sounds like that was the case down there in Benjamin Rush and John Hines. But I have to ask you, what's how long have you been the coordinator for Pennsylvania for Field to Fork?
I'm very new. I came on in late September. So they told me I was going to have to hit the ground running, and they were right. Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of events right out of the gate.
And I thought it might be a case where you were here 1 or 2 years. And so that's why I wanted to ask you, how did Pennsylvania end up being the pilot for this? Because obviously there have been some small volunteer-based events that have taken place across the country. I think you said 17 states, but you're looking to do something next level here, I think, in Pennsylvania, and you're doing these programs across the state. How did Pennsylvania get to be the pilot for this?
I believe it is because the Pennsylvania Game Commission, was so willing to work with us and, put their money where their mouth is. And they were willing to support this position through, I don't have all the details. That was, before I was hired, but they're fully committed to having this position exist and working with us as an organization. And we would like to expand into more states using a similar model. How exactly we'll do that, remains to be seen, but we're definitely looking at expansion.
I think that there may be no better state to try this kind of program, and I'll tell you why. You and I know this, but for those who are listening, Pennsylvania probably has more bow hunters than any other state in the nation. I think, depending on the year, and that's both bow and crossbow. I want to make sure I say that. I think anywhere from 330 to 340,000 archery licenses are sold. Now, even though I know that, I'm astounded to hear that number. That's a lot of archery licenses or stamps that are stolen every year, and I'm sure that's more than a number of states have bow hunters. So it's incredible. There's a rich heritage here, but also a rich bow hunting heritage, and so I think that Pennsylvania is obviously a leader when it comes to hunting in this country, and I applaud them for looking at different opportunities to recruit new hunters. Because the other part of this is obviously, the licenses, hunters are declining over time. You have your big baby boomer generation now is coming to the end. So we have to look at ways to keep introducing people to the sport. And what you're doing is incredible, because you're taking a new tactic or a new approach.
Definitely, yeah.
The other thing I wanted to ask you is, what's the best story you've ever heard? Now, I know you've only been doing this. You only went through the one cycle of the hunts, but there must be something that jumps out to you that you want to share. Like, when you think back, what's the best aspect or the best story you heard from somebody who took part in it?
The first story that comes to mind is 71-year-old Jean, who was scheduled for the first hunt, which was, I guess, October. Didn't get a deer. Came to the next hunt, didn't get a deer. Came to the next hunt, didn't get a deer. Because we offer standby spots. If we have a an excess of mentors and there's, an extra blind, someone can show up and just wait and hope to get a spot. So she showed up every time. Finally, on the last hunt, she got her deer. She was so patient the whole season. You'd ask her, how's the hunt going? You're not getting any deer. You're not even seeing any deer sometimes. And she would say, oh, this is the best time I've ever had. What an opportunity to just be out here. And I even saw a buck today. I'm just so happy that I even saw one. I've never seen one before or whatever the case was, but she was just eternally optimistic. And it was just so fitting that she came the whole season and finally did get her first deer ever on the last event of the season. And she tracked her deer down, and I filmed the whole thing. I put it on Instagram. It was really sweet. Seeing her pose with her deer at the end. What a great story. And she signed up with her adult daughter to come hunt. They were both first-time hunters. They were familiar with the refuge. I think they saw some signs up advertising that we were going to do these hunts. And they thought, let's try something different. We've never done this before. And, they were very familiar faces at the events. And I'm really happy that she got that deer at the end.
Now, did I hear you correctly? You said she was 71. It was the first time she ever stepped in the woods to do any kind of hunting.
Yep.
That is phenomenal. That is something I probably never expected to hear. And obviously she ended up having a great experience. And, you talk about the process where she persevered and stuff doing, and that's the reality of deer hunting. You're not going to go out. It's not like trout fishing in Pennsylvania. You're not going to go out and usually get a deer in the first time that you go out in the woods during a season. It sometimes works like that, but you have to put the work in. But there's so many other benefits. There's the outdoors. There's the mental health aspect. There's the being in the outdoors and observing nature. There's a lot of components that go into hunting. But having success on that first day is not always the way it goes. The fact that she kept trying it, especially at her age, never hunting before, that's pretty incredible. And I'm guessing that made you feel pretty good.
Oh yeah. She was a trooper, and we didn't always have good weather either. And she, it didn't matter to her. She was there. She was having a blast.
Yeah. Now, I wanted to ask you, now that you have a year under your belt and you're going to year 2, what's your vision for the programs in Pennsylvania? Where are you hoping that we go from here? I don't know how long the programs were taking place in the other parts of the state, like up in Erie and stuff, but what would you like to see this program move towards or become?
We are adding additional locations. Obviously there's like a maximum number we can hit, given the length of the season, but we are adding programs on other properties, and we want to see the existing community continue on. We just launched a Facebook group where everyone can keep in touch. We're going to, keep them up to date on hunting opportunities outside of deer hunting. We're going to keep them, up to date on educational materials. We'll be giving them our deer hunting 101 course that they can go through at their leisure. All kinds of, just community engagement. I think, in our DNA, hunting is a very social activity. And I think we do a lot better when we're sharing it with others. And we want to keep that deer camp feeling going. And if it has to be on Facebook sometimes, so be it.
And that is a huge part of it, the camaraderie and the element, the community, I should say, is probably the best word there. Now, I'm just curious, what's the name of the Facebook page? Obviously, maybe the URL is too long, but what's the name of the Facebook page?
Well, it's a private group so that, we don't have trolls coming in, but, everyone who's gone to the hunts will get an invite, and we'll keep that same group open to people who are joining this upcoming season, and they'll all be put in the same group.
I'm glad we talked about that because I didn't know if it was a public facing one or if it was a private one. So thank you for covering that. Now, you've talked a little bit about your hunting experience. Do you bow hunt yourself? Are you a bow hunter, or do you at least do some archery hunting now?
I do. And actually, I progressed from rifle to crossbow to compound bow. And the next step was going to be, I'm going to finish and keep a primitive bow of my own. But something about maybe being at these John Hines hunts has made me kind of fall in love with the crossbow again. So I'm mixing it up, and I'm actually excited to do rifle season again. So I'm up for using anything, but yes, at my core, I think archery is where my interest is most.
No, and that's awesome. And obviously, usually for archery season, especially in Pennsylvania, here, it's a great time to be outdoors in October and early November. It's not too cold. And I wanted to ask you, we talked about this program, and probably should look at it a different way. It takes a lot of partners. We talked about the mentors, but there's obviously groups that are involved in putting this together. So do you have partners outside of the NDA and the Game Commission that are helping to make it possible? Is anybody maybe sponsoring some of the clothes and equipment that you want to mention? I don't know how you giving everybody everything. How do you get that all? How do you amass it all to make a turnkey program like this even possible? That's another important thing here. You must be getting some help from somewhere.
Well, one of the groups I'd like to mention is Friends of Heinz Refuge, which is a nonprofit that supports the activities of John Heinz. And what they contribute is they cover the cost of each hunter's first deer to be processed. So if a hunter doesn't want to or doesn't have the time to process their own deer, usually we drive the deer to the processor with the hunter. We have them fill out, what kind of meats and they want processed from their deer. And this group covers the cost of that, which is really nice. So it really is from beginning to end. It's so seamless for the hunter. And then as far as equipment goes, we have some new crossbows this year from a Pennsylvania brand called Syked Hunt, SYKD. Clothing and stuff like that is provided by the mentees themselves. They're just wearing their normal clothes. Some of the hunts we have had on the private land, we have had First Light gear, First Light clothing provided, but typically, the hunter is providing their own outfit.
Yeah, no, but that's really getting them off to a great start. And I did not know about the processing part of it, because that can be a barrier sometimes too, because you get a deer process is probably upwards of $100 or more now, and that's just for your basic cuts and things like that. So you're really giving them an incredible, immersive, well-rounded experience to make it as inviting as possible, and I love that. Now, what was the age range of the people? You mentioned you had a 71-year-old. Did you have some younger people there too? What was the age range of the participants? Let's say at the Heinz program.
So. The NDA Field of Fork program focuses on adults, but because we're partnered with these other organizations, they had opened some slots to a few youth hunters. And actually, I'm glad they did, because those youth hunters were amazing. I think the youngest may have been roughly 12, I think. I think one of the youth that I mentored was 12. And she was the only hunter to get a deer that particular week. So, yeah.
No, and that's phenomenal. And I think, if you're talking about like coming from an urban area, it doesn't matter how old you are. If you come from a non-hunting family or a non-hunting environment, you're from a non-hunting family. So you're giving them an opportunity earlier in life. And for that example, you might help that person then become a lifelong hunter, and he or she might then go and introduce others to the sport. So I like that. And I know what you're saying about the program being only adult focused, but if we can get some more young people involved, that's going to be important going forward. I want to take a quick break here. I have a couple more questions for you before we wrap up. And I wanted to remind everybody that the bow hunting podcast is brought to you by Lancaster Archery. For all your bow hunting needs, visit lancasterarchery.com. We've got the gear, we've got the knowledge, we've got the passion. And Elizabeth, I really appreciate you taking time to talk with us here today and share about the Field to Fork program, because it's such an important program, especially in today's day and age, for so many reasons. And before we wrap up, I did want to ask you, you're ingrained in this program, but what is your favorite part of this program, this Field to Fork program? What is it that drew you here to want to be involved in it?
Well, I was looking for a new job, and I actually went on NDA's website to see if they had any job openings. And I wasn't expecting to see this. I thought, they would want someone to help lick stamps or something. And I would have been okay with that. I was like, I want to be involved with the NDA. But the job that they did have open, the one position that they did have open, I read what qualifications they were looking for, and it was basically a copy of my resume. And I thought, oh my God, I have to apply for this. And, it was a long interview process, but they said, you were our first pick from the beginning. And I kind of had a feeling, but I wasn't sure. But it just really, from the beginning, seemed like it was meant for me. And I do really feel like I'm in the right place.
Well, congratulations to you. Kudos to the NDA for developing this tremendous program. Hopefully, we're going to continue to see it grow. While you're the first state coordinator, hopefully in the future you'll have a number of colleagues across the country, at least in the deer-rich states, because it's an important program to recruit and retain hunters. And I want to thank you for taking some time and speaking with us today. It's such a great program. I know you're really busy. I'm sure you got a lot of planning, especially as you add more and more Field to Fork events. But Elizabeth, thank you so much for joining us on the Bowhunting Podcast.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Thanks for downloading the Peterson's Bowhunting Podcast. All bow hunting, all the time. Pick up the latest issue of Peterson's Bowhunting magazine on your local newsstand, or connect with us online at bowhuntingmag.com.